Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne. And ever since 2017, I've been doing this challenge where I take Babs, a character from my comic Unfamiliar, and try to paint her as realistically as I possibly can. And it is a bit of a challenge for me because I am primarily a cartoonist. And I think I've made pretty great strides since my first attempt, which, let's face it, was not even close. This time I feel like it was a bit of a mixed bag, and it took me a full 3 hours. That's not even including all of the steps, because there were periods where I didn't even record because I was just fiddling or making a lot of changes with like overlays and stuff. But typically when I attempt this, I always start with a sketch. One of the things that makes for a really great painter is being able to think in planes and not lines, but I still vastly benefit from starting with lines and having some kind of like lined sketch underneath, so that's how I began this. One of the first things that I really wanted to focus on was creating a strong sense of shadow. That was something that I tried really consciously to do last time in 2021. I also wanted to pan back a little bit because in the original picture that I'm sort of basing all of these challenges off of, you can actually see like the top part of her dress and her sleeves, but I've been sort of cutting in closer and closer, probably to do less work, honestly. And this time I'm going to try to push myself to actually draw what the cartoon version has. And the urge to do like a line art was really strong. My first attempt to just block in some like shapes on the face was extremely painful, honestly. The thing that I don't like about painting is that I feel like it has to be so ugly before it can be even remotely decent looking, and I just don't have the confidence to get through some of those ugly phases unless I'm doing a challenge like this. I just panic and switch to something else. But no matter, I tried to block things in and think about having a shadow cast over the, I guess it would be the left side of the face, her right side. I just felt like it would create some drama, and I also thought that if I needed to take a reference picture, which I didn't do for most of this, that it would be something that I could create easily on my own face and work from that. Now, last time I worked pretty directly from a reference of my own face, and that was one of my main sort of frustrations with last year's attempt. I just feel like she ended up looking like a weird, uncanny version of me, and that's not how I picture Babs. She is not a self-insert, so I definitely wanted her to look a lot different from my own facial structure, and I wanted to try to work from my head. I knew that this would either be my downfall or the next step in my journey to getting better at realism, and I didn't know which it was at this point. But once I started working in gray, I was finally starting to feel like I was getting a hang of what this portrait was going to end up looking like. I liked having her head tilted a little bit, and I wanted her to look at the viewer because that's what she's doing in the original picture that I'm working off from her. Again, I was trying not to use different like facial expressions and posing just to make it easier on myself. I was trying to be a little bit more honest to the source, and the expression was the hardest part. As you guys probably know, when you're drawing with a lot of detail, it's easier if the character that you're drawing is not emoting very strongly. Having that sort of blank, placid face is probably the easiest to paint and draw, because, you know, the skin's not getting pulled on and you're not having to take any risks. That's probably why you see so many art pieces of women just sort of staring blankly, not really emoting much at all. And I was trying not to do that, but it's so tricky. And that was definitely something I was worried about. I started trying to put in a little bit of detail, and I was even allowing myself to do a little like line art kind of stuff around some of the little areas that were like more high contrast, like in particular the highlight on her nose and parts of her mouth and lips. I find drawing the mouth and like painting lips is so difficult for some reason. I don't know why. I feel like I always make them look weird. That's something I'm going to have to work on. And this time I also really wanted wanted to try my best to do a better job of using layers to my advantage. I'm doing digital art anyway, so I might as well try to not just paint this whole thing on 1 or 2 layers, but to actually use them so that I can like alpha lock them and really play around and have an easier time with like her clothes, for example, which has been notoriously something that has always looked a lot flatter and less impressive than the face in all of my earlier attempts. I should probably mention that realism and hyperrealism are not the same thing. I'm not trying to go for like is this a photo or is this an illustration kind of realism, but I am trying to get farther away from cartooniness and more into something that is grounded in reality. So we're trying to do like smaller eyes, more detail around the nose. Cartoons usually like remove the lips and the nostrils and make the eyes really huge, so we're trying to kind of undo that and add that detail back into the face. Now I am traditionally trained at art school. I drew lots of realistic faces. I studied both my own and my classmates' faces, but it has been a long time since I've done any of that type of practice, and I do think that last year I pledged to do more life drawing and drawing from realistic models and stuff, and I don't really think that I did that. I was mostly hustling on my book and doing more cartoon art than ever, so yeah, I kind of felt the stress of that. I started to try to like redo her eye because I realized that the way I was drawing it was still very cartoony with like a hard black line around the entirety of the eye, but I ended up really hating it, so I backtracked. I backtracked a lot through this process, I think partially because I didn't have a reference and also partially because I really wanted to make progress this year. One of my other big complaints about last year's attempt was, well, it was kind of realistic looking. It was realistic like a iPhone photo. You could tell from the way that the face is exaggerated that it has that like phone camera warping, and I really didn't want to do that this year. I wanted it to not look like it was through a lens, but more like, well, I guess it could be through like a real camera lens, but not, yeah, like warped the way that like phone selfies are. So I wanted to kind of pull back. That was another good part about having like her shoulders and like part of her dress in the shot. It gives it less of that like drawn selfie kind of look, which I definitely did not want to go for. I struggled so much with her lips. I felt like they looked kind of like fillery or just like too much. And I also really wanted her lips to be parted. Her mouth is open in the original drawing, the cartoon drawing, and I have not attempted that since. This has been something I've been deliberately avoiding because it is hard to draw. Drawing the teeth in the inside of the mouth often looks really funky, and it's just easier not to do it, but I decided this year I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna try to give her some kind of expression that isn't just this like vacant nothingness. So I have to open her mouth at least a little to give her even a hint of the expressiveness that's in the original cartoon. And I struggled with her gaze as well for a while. This is the point at which the painting kind of started to turn around for me. I decided to make the other eye basically almost completely blacked out. I wanted to make the shadow even stronger. I realized that it probably would be because of how strong I made the shadow over the other side of the bridge of her nose, that her eye should be basically completely covered, especially with her thick bangs that are very low. And then I knew that I needed to make her other eye a real focal point so that she wouldn't have her expression be lost. I definitely noticed it was getting a little sparkly and anime Disney-like, so I had to try to tone it down, make her eye a little smaller. She still looks like she has falsies on. The other struggle was, of course, the fact that Babs is supposed to be very beautiful. I bring this up in every single realism challenge because I'm always being torn between like how much like she should look like she has makeup on and stuff. She's supposed to be really pretty, so I do picture her with like naturally long dark eyelashes. I think that that's very pretty and something I'm envious of because I have very light hair, so my eyelashes are not dark naturally. But I didn't want it to look like she has like falsies on both rows of her eyes, which is very it's a common beginner's mistake. To go overboard on the eyelashes. And then I played around with her teeth quite a bit. Again, teeth they're very difficult. The more realistic you get, the harder it is to draw teeth, I find, and I definitely struggled with it. I ended up kind of liking the structure of her teeth, the way that I did them. I didn't want them to be a completely flat, like denture-like kind of look, so I made them slightly offset from each other. And I kept playing around with her eyebrows because, again, I wanted to bring in more of an expression, but her bangs are covering most of her eyebrows. This is the first time in the whole drawing that I flipped it, and I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't nearly as jacked up as I was expecting. Usually when I do these challenges and I do the first flip, it is like pure torture, but I think because part of the other side of her face is covered, we didn't have as many problems as I usually do. I think that in particular, I had trouble moving from the sort of stylized blocking that I had started out with into something a little smoother. I sometimes tend to over smooth and make everything look really like soft and smushy, and at this phase I really definitely did that. I mean, she basically melted, but luckily I did this on a sort of dummy layer and I ended up overlaying them, and I feel like it gave us a sort of really good mixture of still having the definition that I had started with, but making her a little softer and making it much easier to move forward and keep painting. It just softened everything up and it made those harsh areas look a little bit smoother. I wanted to start trying to work on her outfit because I knew that I always leave that to the end after I'm already exhausted from working on the face and the hair for too long, and it ends up looking completely flat. I think last year was actually a pretty poor approach. I think her collar looks terrible in last year's attempt, and in the year previous I think her clothes are also the weakest point, so this time I tried to give them a little bit extra love, and I also went into the hair and tried to piece things together a little bit more and add some definition back in. I tried to pick these huge chunks, these big areas of shadow to give it some real definition, and here you see that we jump ahead a little bit. I was getting quite frustrated, so that this was a period of time where I actually didn't film and just started working and playing with various different overlays and lighting effects. As you can see, I kind of blasted it with some warm, like peachy lighting. I ended up toning this down a lot because I felt like I was kind of blowing out the painting and going a bit too hard with the digital effects, which can definitely be an easy mistake when you're working in digital art. I kept messing with her eyes. I wanted to add a lot more detail and clarity in, but every time I did it, it just made it look kind of cheap. I don't even know how to describe it. But here is where I finally got the shape of her eye right, and I knew that this time I wanted to actually try to put the hearts that are a design feature of her character design into her eye. I don't know if this is hubris or actual like maturing, but I definitely was like avoiding all that stylization in my previous attempts, and this time I felt like I could actually put some of that back into the drawing without losing the realism aspect. Like, the structure of her face would still remain the same even if I put a little heart in her eye. This year I feel like the whole process was really about blocking things in, smoothing things out, adding details in, and then repeating the process over and over until I was satisfied. Her face was by far the hardest part this year. I do think her ear is quite bad, and honestly I prefer if you just not look at it, but at least I drew it this year. Again, I feel like this year I challenged myself more. I don't know if the final product is necessarily like a huge leap in technique. Again, probably because I wasn't practicing. I do think it looks like nicer to me, but I think it's a little more stylized than last year, and that's probably because last year I was so directly working off a photo, but last year's finished product is just not, I just don't like it. Like, again, I guess because it's like primarily based on my own face, it just feels like a bad self-portrait rather than a compelling attempt to make a realistic portrait of Babs, whereas at least this one is closer to like how I would picture her if she was real. So I guess it's closer to Babs and farther maybe from the challenge. I don't know, you guys will have to let me know, like, what do you think? Be kind in your wording, please, but I'd love to know if you feel like I've improved this year from last year, or if you feel like it's more of a lateral move. And definitely let me know if you try this challenge yourself. I highly recommend it around this time of year. It's always fun at the end of the year to sort of like check up on yourself and see how you've improved. I have had a really crazy year with Unfamiliar coming out in book form. It's available all throughout the country, and hopefully it will be available in, I know it's going to be available in other parts of the world soon, but yeah. And if you have bought the book, thank you so much, by the way. I feel like this has been a good year for my art and everything, and I hope you guys feel the same way. I know that there's been a lot of aspects of this year that have really sucked, so I hope that at least in your art practice that you're feeling good about the progress you made. And yeah, thank you so much for watching till the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you so much to my wonderful patrons, including Heartless Doll, Scarities, BitQ1, Ava Kerner, Soy Milk, Kizart, Finn Must Die, Aries Chaos, Solar System, Live, Salty Jackrabbit, Noose Milk, Ravenscrow, Saucelot, T-Hill Music, Jabber Dabber Doo, Gender Was Stolen, it's Jamal, K, Moo Milk, Kadaria, Deadly Nightshade Art, Astral Fox Art, The Expressive Poker Face, Tsubaki, Michael Lavali, Cutie Pie, Ruin Raincrow, Rainwater Pearls, Ice Cream Pal, Life on Mars, Cola, JJ Jade, and of course, Live.